I'm Janet Booth, a professional astrologer from West Hartford, Connecticut, and welcome to my program on astrology called Looking Up. The name for today's episode is A Moment in Time, because time is really the essence. We say time is of the essence, but time is the essence of astrology. And you know, we have a lot of phrases we use about time. We say, oh, in a split second, or in a New York minute, in the blink of an eye, in a heartbeat, time stands still. Or sometimes you might have your life flash before your eyes, or one of those defining moments that comes along, and there was before and there was after. So we don't often stop in our busy lives and ask ourselves, just what is time? Time can be very subjective. You know, it seems to like speed along when we're busy with something, and it really drags when we're waiting for that special occasion. Remember when we were kids and summer seemed to last forever, but Christmas would never come? And we have those moments where time seems to slow down, like if you've ever been in an accident, you'll have that feeling of, you know it was 3 seconds, but it seemed like half a minute or 2 minutes. Or I don't know if any of you have ever done hallucinogenic drugs or mind-altering drugs, but they can really alter your perception of time. Sometimes we revisit a past moment in a flashback, or sometimes we seem to skip ahead in time and have that experience of déjà vu. I've already been here before. So time also seems to go more quickly as we age. You know, there was a birthday party a few years ago for my little great niece, and it was her 3rd birthday. And so they told her, well, you're 3 now. And she said, well, where did 2 go? And all the adults laughed, because from our grown-up viewpoint, we see that our years go by very quickly. But I think what she really meant was, all I've ever known is being 2. How come it is I'm not 2 anymore? What's supposed to be different now that I'm 3? I recently heard someone explain or give a possible explanation for that phenomenon when we feel like time seems to go by more quickly the older we get. And it was this. It was sort of that logarithmic viewpoint of when we're 10, say, 1 year is 10% of your life. But by the time you're 50, 1 year of your age is 2% of your life. So as those years go by, the amount that they constitute of your experience decreases, and so therefore it seems like they're going by more quickly. I don't know, I thought that was a pretty decent explanation. But there certainly is that subjective nature to time. And even though we say time flies, sometimes our notes fly, so that was kind of fun. So we have our subjective experience of time, and then of course there is consensus reality and our objective measurable time. And this is marked out in minutes, hours, days, weeks, months, years, decades, centuries, so forth. And some of these are really man-made constructs, but there is a basis in observable astronomical phenomenon that connects directly to time phenomenon. So it has to do with being alive here on planet Earth, and Earth has our satellite, the moon, that goes around us, and as a unit, sun and Earth and moon, we go around the sun. So we have this rotation of the Earth, and that spins on the axis in 24 hours, and that's our day. You know, we say the sun appears to rise in the east and come to the center of the sky in the southerly direction if we live in the northern hemisphere at the noon time, and then it goes and sets in the west, out of view, but kind of underfoot beyond the other side of the Earth from us. It's in a northerly direction at the midnight hour. So this relates to our experience of a day, and the sun really hasn't moved relative to us, or we haven't moved that much relative to the sun, other than we're spinning around, and when we face the sun we call it day, and when we're not facing the sun, whoops, that's night. So one rotation equals 1 day. Then we have our revolution around the sun, and that marks a year. And if you're not living right at the middle of the Earth's belly button at the equator, you're going to be influenced by that tip, and you're going to have your seasons when you lean towards the sun and it's warmer, and you lean away from the sun and it's colder. And we also have the other very important related time phenomenon from the moon. And the moon goes around the Earth in approximately a month, which is right where you get the word month. Okay? So the lunar cycle from one new moon to the next new moon, and the new moon is when the moon passes the sun from our viewpoint, and we can't really see it because the brightness of the sun is blocking out the moon. But from one new moon to the next new moon is about a month. It's averaging 29-ish something days, and that's about the same time that it takes the sun to go through one sign, but not exactly, because we've got, 365 days in a year, 360 degrees in a circle. We split that into the 12 signs of 30 degrees each, and the sun can take just a little more than 29 something days on average to go through a sign. So that's a little bit off, but they're very, very close. And that month is definitely related to the moon. So we've got three major factors going on here: Earth rotation, Earth revolution, and moon orbiting the Earth. Now that moon movement and month measurement is so important that ancient cultures, where they didn't maybe have literacy and people weren't going to be reading any kind of man-made calendar, their years and their calendars went by the new moons. And it would be one day after the moon passed the sun, when it got out of the beams of the sun, and you could actually start to see that little fingernail sliver of the new moon after sunset in the west, and that would be the first day of their lunar month. And the Hebrew calendar runs on the lunar months, the Islamic calendar runs on the lunar months, and the Chinese calendar, and you know your Chinese astrology a little bit, you know that, runs on lunar calendars. And that's why their new year is a different day all the time from our Gregorian calendar, where we're measuring more on the solar year and our seasons, things like that. So that's a man-made construct, but the real nature has its lunar months. Now, in astrology, we're always looking at these cycles, and there are cycles within cycles, and there are similarities from these cycles, but there's never an exact repeat of a prior moment. Each moment is unique. Or let's say, with the varying lengths of orbits of the different planets, they won't repeat the same positions relative to one another, all of them, in any one human's lifetime span. And I'm not a mathematical genius, and I didn't even try to multiply, 248 years of Pluto times 165 years of Neptune times 84 years of Uranus times, 30 for Saturn, 12 for Jupiter, 2 for Mars, blah, 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 and come up with what astronomical number it is of how long it would be before you could have an exact repetition, but it's probably not even within a millennium. So as that saying goes, you never step into the same river twice, and you never have the same cosmic currents or rivers twice in your lifetime. Things are always changing. You can't get the same chart twice. So if you miss your magic moment, you're not going to have another one just like it. And when I say magic moment, that might mean, say, a time that you're selecting what we call electional astrology for a particular event, launch of something, etc. Now, when we look at a chart, it's like stopping the clock of those ongoing planetary cycles, and it freezes that moment in time kind of artificially so that we can examine it. But what we can say is that at that moment, that an entity begins, whether it's a person, a car rolling off an assembly line, a kitten being born, a business being registered with the Secretary of the State's office, or the first time a stock trades on the market. All of these are key beginning moments in time, and they have the influence of those energies present at that moment. And those are going to stick with the entity throughout the course of its lifetime. Then, of course, time marches on, and we're going to have other moments coming to interact with that moment. Or we could have two people's charts and their moments interact with one another. So, kind of what sets you apart from anybody else born on your birthday, and especially in your birthplace, would be that time of day. And without a birth moment, or without a birth time, and knowing your birth moment, the forecasting in astrology becomes a lot more difficult. And with that birth time, it can be a lot more precise. So there's sort of that static chart, but as the planets move on in their orbits, we're going to compare subsequent moments to that starting moment. So we use a system in astrology, and I've mentioned it before, and perhaps you've heard about it too, called progressions. And it's like measuring the progress in your life. And it's a symbolic system, and it says each day after your birth is going to represent consequential? No, that's sequential. They might be consequential. Sequential years of your life. So if you're 14, we're looking 14 days after your birth. If you're 25, we're looking 25 days after your birth to see what's going on at that point in time and how does that connect to the minute that you were born or to your birth chart. And this gives us the idea that those first few months of your life, or of a baby's life, are very important because seeds are being planted that are going to develop later on. So you might find, oh, the baby got really sick when it was 7 days old, and it was sick for 3 days. You might then watch out and see when that baby or that child is 7 to 10 might be sickly years for that child because there's a correspondence there with the progressions. Now, the other thing that we're tracking a lot in astrology is the current movements of the planets through the signs at their respective paces, and these are what we call transits. And you might even think of like the transit system of buses going on a particular route in a town. And that route really is the zodiac. All those buses are going around, or planets are going around the zodiac route. So we're going to compare those movements also to your birth chart. And there are specific, very important moments in time that relate to the transits, like when two slow planets finally make a connection. We've talked sometimes like about the square at right angles to one another, and their forces kind of jar one another. That can be an important moment for planetary things, for news items, but if it's at degrees that are very connected to your birth chart, you might feel a big shift in your life when those kind of moments come along. And actually, if something like that is happening in those transits and it's connecting to one of the slower planets at your birth, then there's no worries about having your birth time or not, because those slow planets won't have moved much on your day of birth, and we can be pretty precise with those timings, fortunately. So we try to construct what we call a birth chart, and it's going to have relations to the directions, and it's going to have relations to the signs. And those are going to be very dependent upon the time of day and time of year that you're born. So we're going to put up a little illustration for a moment of what we call the natural zodiac, which are the 12 signs, and they're always in the order that the planets move through them, and the seasons start with Aries at spring, which would be in the eastern direction, and that's where you'd see it on 9 o'clock on a clock face, and it shows number 1 in that slice of pie. So these slices of pie are called the houses, and they're like the departments in your life. And when we have the time that you're born, we're going to line up the signs with your houses. This is how the signs in the sort of generic look would be. So we would have the northern direction would be at the bottom of the chart, where house 4 is, and that would be summer season starts with Cancer. Over on the western horizon, which would be where 3 o'clock is on a clock face, is the house 7, and that would be where autumn starts when the sun arrives into Libra. And at the top of the chart, house 10 is where we place Capricorn. That's where winter starts when the sun reaches the 1st degree of Capricorn. So that goes in a counterclockwise fashion. And on a daily basis, the movement of the planets, because the Earth is rotating, they appear to move in a clockwise fashion. So these houses are going to be very important for figuring out what's happening in your particular life. And although it's not written on the illustration, the horizontal line is what we call the horizon, horizontal. And the vertical line is called the meridian. And this is where we get AM and PM. Ante means before, and when the sun is on the eastern side, well, from your viewpoint, the eastern side of the chart, that's ante-meridian from midnight up to noon. And then it goes post, past the meridian at noon for the afternoon and evening down to midnight. So what I want to show you is how we can try to see how the time of year and the time of day impact what sign is coming up over the eastern horizon at your birth. And that's what's called your rising sign. And it's very important because it starts your chart. It has a lot to do with your personality, your appearance, your body, your health. And if you know your rising sign, that's the one I recommend you read if you read horoscope forecasts, because they're going to be written as if the sign is rising. So if your sun sign, the sign you know yourself to be from the time of year you're born, is rising, it rises at sunrise. The sun is rising. Okay, so let's take a look. I have this old illustration that I'm stepping on my mic cord. I put this together for the West Hartford community, Life Learn Education. Years ago, I taught a course called Beyond Sun Signs. So I said, oh, here's the sun. Right now we're showing the sun in Scorpio, which is between Libra and Sagittarius. And if it was sunrise, the Scorpio sun sign would be rising. But if we take the sun up to the noon position, you know, as the Earth turns 24 hours for all 360 degrees, all 12 signs, it's about 2 hours per sign. So you're going to find you go 1, 2, 3 signs past Scorpio. Here's Aquarius, and that would be the sign rising in the east at the first house. Or if you take the sun over here to sunset in the west, and it's in the 7th house, the rising sign will be the opposite sign of Scorpio, which is Taurus. Or if you go down to midnight, when the sun is no longer visible below the horizon, it's down at the 4th house, and we're going to have 1, 2, 3 signs before or ahead of the sun sign is the rising sign. Now, you might be born near the end of a sign, and then when it's sunrise, very little of Scorpio is left in the 1st house. The 1st house might be almost all Sagittarius. So when you go to read your horoscope forecast, it makes more sense even to read Sagittarius than your rising sign. But if you're born, you know, near the beginning or the middle of your sign, it's going to correlate pretty well. And there are certain times of year where it'll get skewed from the rough rule of thumb of 2 hours per sign. But this is kind of a little rundown that I wrote. So for instance, if you find out your birth time is between 2 and 4 p.m., probably the sun is over here in the 8th house, and you're going to have 7 signs before yours as the rising sign. So now we've just started to fall apart on an illustration, so we're done with that. More papers falling. Now I knew today would be kind of a discombobulated day because that's how it is. I'm recording this when Mercury is retrograde in Pisces, and if you watched my program, I think it was the February program, getting you ready for March with the Mercury retrograde in Pisces, you'll know what I'm talking about. Or maybe on my website, astrologybooth.com, in the blog booth, you'd like to go and read my blog called As Pisces as It Gets, because honey, that's what we're in right now. So here we're going to find, like I said with this illustration, your birth time has a very important effect on what house in the chart does the sun end up in. What is the sign coming up on the eastern horizon that you read for your horoscope? And how do the subsequent signs align around the circle with your houses? Because the houses are really where the action takes place in your life. They're the circumstances of your life. We could say that your characteristics or your personality traits can be very strongly seen even without a birth time, because they will come from how the planets are playing together that day. But we're really going to know, where does that strength shine best in your life? Or where does that pitfall really come into play for you when we see which planets rule what signs and where those houses and signs go together. So if you're going to, have a birth chart done, you really want to get that time of day. And if you don't have that time of day, there is a very ugly, painstaking process that an astrologer can undertake for you called rectification, which tries to take 10 or 12 events that have happened in your life and speculate what your chart probably is to bring the timing of those different events when they came. But it's bad. A lot of astrologers won't do it. I'll do it for a price, but it's a high price. So it's worth it to find that birth time out. If it's not on your birth certificate or in your baby book, contact the Records or Vital Statistics Department in your birthplace. That is where hospitals turn records over to. And obviously you were not stillborn, and when you're not stillborn, the doctor usually files what's called a record of live birth, and that almost always has the time on it. Should be in your file. And if you call up that city hall, don't say, I want my birth certificate. Say, I want to find out what time of day I'm born. How do I do that? And usually they want self-addressed stamped envelope and a check. But you can find out, and it's better than paying your astrologer to rectify your chart. So when you know that birth time, then the subsequent moments in time flow from that. And we can look at what's called the return of the sun every year within a calendar day of your birthday, the solar return, and that gives an annual forecast. We can do the monthly return of the moon, called a lunar return, and that gives you a monthly forecast. You can know when these particular progressions are going to come to their peak for you, or when these moving planets transits are really going to come and affect you. So we use the word radical in astrology, and we don't mean, oh, rad, and oh, he's so far out, or he's protesting or revolutionary. The root word of root is radix, the Latin root. And radix is even a word that's used sometimes, particularly in Britain, for a natal chart. And when we say a chart is radical, this is used in what's called horary astrology. It's a technique like a divination technique that says if you ask the question to your astrologer, at that moment that the astrologer understands your question, a chart is constructed and it's used to answer your question. And we would check to see if the chart is radical. Does it contain the roots of your question? Does it go to the heart of the matter through its symbols so that it can speak to the astrologer and give your answer? And that word hora is from Greek, or horoscope, Greek for hour, horary, the chart of the hour, or horoscope, to scope, look at the hour, or now we go down to the minute of your birth. So these are the important moments in your life, the moment that you begin, the moment when new cycles begin for you, your returns. You can even do a Mars return, you can do other returns. A big one is Saturn return. In fact, Saturn is the Latin name for the same god in Greek was Kronos, and you can hear that Kronos root in words like synchronicity, chronicle, chronometer, the name for your watch, and chronological, okay? So Saturn is interesting to watch because it has a lot to do with maturation and aging, and its cycle of approximately 29-ish years. When you split it into quarters, it's about 7.5, 8. Well, Piaget, the Swiss psychologist, noticed that rational thinking, adult thinking, comes into play around age 7 to 8. That's also when we get our teeth, our adult teeth. And a lot of things happen in these multiples of the 7-ish, 7-year itch, you might even say, in the commitment of a marriage. We all have Saturn return at about 29, 58, 87 if you live long enough. And as we mature, certainly by that second Saturn return in our late 50s, we start to see the signs of aging. In our mind, we might think we're still so young, but skin, teeth, bones, maybe posture, but yeah, bone, skin, and teeth are all related to Saturn. And I've been laughing lately because I'm starting to get a kind of movement in my bottom teeth, and one of them is getting a little bit wiggly. It's like being pushed by other ones. And oh, like last year, my doctor said, "Oh, you have some bone loss in your teeth." I thought, well, if I have bone loss in my teeth, I got bone loss everywhere. So not that I think I feel that long, but I see the wrinkles. And now I'm having teeth issues at one of these Saturn times. Like Saturn was just at 90 degrees to where it was when I was born. I've been around 2.25 times. So that's pretty interesting. And Saturn has to do with learning lessons and with karma. And I always say to people, you know, be careful about how you live this life, because your present life is the past life of your future life. Ha ha ha. So speaking of important moments of time, in time, I have a motto, it seize the right day. So one of my specialties is helping people find those optimal times. And you'll find information about that on my website. You'll also find in the study booth, beginner articles, an article about what's a rising sign and why should you care, and other exciting things that you can learn about with astrology. And now one of our other time phrases is sort of like coming to bear, where we say running out of time or time's up. So I hope you learned some things about time today and why it's so important to know your birth time. And we'll see you again and talk more about astrology next time on Looking Up.